Okay. First of all, thank you for inviting me and for being here. How's my stress level so far? All right. This is the first time. This is first time for actually. I only got here last night, but already I've seen a bunch of first things, which is great. But I haven't had my stress level taken during a talk before, so this is very fun. I also wanted to take a picture, if you don't mind, of you guys, because I have to say, and this is honestly, I don't think I've ever given a talk in such a cool environment like this setup, but also it's very comfortable. And if I had to redesign the space in which we give talks in my organization, I would make it just like this. So if you don't mind, everybody say cheese. There we go. All right, thank you. Yeah, no, it's a great space. So, okay, so what I want to do today, and let me just go to the first slide here, is let me say what I don't want to do. I don't want to sound like I'm negative about intelligent systems, machine intelligence, artificial intelligence, autonomy, you know, the areas that we all know are developing fairly quickly. What I do want to say is that, you know, what we see in the media and what we're, you know, and especially, you know, those of us who work in technology, we might get the impression that what's actually happening in with the advancing, you know, changes, increases in intelligent systems, that we're moving toward a convergence or in the direction of human intelligence. And the argument is that we are not. The current machine intelligence is moving in a very different direction than human intelligence. And that's okay. And I'll talk about why. I'll talk a little bit about the nature of human intelligence. I'll talk about the nature of you know, our current paths of increasing machine intelligence. Talk about why I think they're not converging and what the consequences of that are. And then, you know, maybe from my point of view, the most important thing is what that means for how we continue to develop machine intelligence, right? So if we continue to develop machine intelligence as we have been for the past, you know, 20, 30, 40 years, we will continue to have machines that actually don't work well with humans. And I'll talk about some of those issues. And what's interesting is I got here last night, right? So I flew in last night from California. Just this morning I had a set of meetings. And I have to say, you know, very honestly, that in the few conversations that I've already had this morning, I think I get the sense that what I'm going to say here is not going to be particularly interesting, or it's not going to be very new, right? But what's interesting in it, so it may be just that in the United States right now, our views, and maybe in Silicon Valley in particular, everybody's very excited about what's happening with self-driving cars and you know, smartphones and everything, and it gives a distorted view. So anyway, so we'll see at the end from the questions whether any of this seems either novel or interesting. So, and again, for, you know, I'm coming here with you know, my view of the media is of course what I see in the U.S. But so I don't know if you guys have the same things in the media, right? But what we're seeing, and certainly the last 5 years, right? There's a lot more in the news about what's happening with increasingly intelligent systems, right? So basically, you know, in the last few years, right, Stephen Hawking, Bill Gates, Elon Musk have all warned about the potential AI dangers of AI, right? Everybody's come out and said, well, you know, we have to be careful that we don't develop evil AI systems, right? And that can actually, you know, take over this kind of thing. And you also have people, you know, recently, right, like Ray Kurzweil still talking about the singularity, right? I don't know if you're familiar with this, but this is, you know, the idea that we're converging on kind of the, you know, the minute you kind of figure it all out, and then all solutions are there. You know, part of what I'm going to argue here is that I don't think we're anywhere near singularity, and that makes the challenges that we have ahead of us different than if we were. Also, you know, obviously interesting time in terms of self-driving cars and companies with robotic operations factories, right? So Amazon runs, you know, an operation that costs an order of magnitude less than it, you know, that it would of, you know, 20 years ago, because robots are doing much of the work, right? I don't know if you've seen YouTube videos of how the system works at Amazon, right? But you have little robots that go and, they look like the little vacuum cleaner robots, and they get under the little shelves that have the product, they lift it up, they bring it over. The only part that you still have a human doing is taking the box or the item and putting it in a box. And the only reason a human is still doing that is because there aren't robots that can do it well enough yet, but they're constantly trying. So I'm sure that will be done soon too. The challenge is that the objects that people order from Amazon are of all different sizes and shapes, and some soft, some hard. That's a hard robotic thing still, right? But everything else is fairly straightforward. And self-driving cars, right? So every company is now doing self-driving cars. Every car company. Every car company has set up labs in Silicon Valley. And the labs in Silicon Valley that we have, so right around us is Nissan labs, there's Mercedes-Benz labs, the BMW lab, the GM lab, the Ford lab, Volkswagen labs, right? So, and they're not labs about wheels or about brakes. It's all the intelligent systems labs, right? And so obviously a lot of excitement about self-driving cars, and just recently, self-driving cars, in Singapore, right? So that was in the news in the last few weeks, right? Self-driving cars in Singapore. Uber, right, which is the sort of, the company with the share riding company. Is there Uber here in Finland? Yes. So in Pittsburgh, they have now, self-driving. They have self-driving cars doing Uber. Okay. And the reason it's in Pittsburgh is because what Uber did was it went and largely bought the robotics professors at Carnegie Mellon, right, in Pittsburgh, and that's why Uber is testing this out in Pittsburgh, because that's where all the researchers are. The thing that you don't hear, and I'll spend a little more time on this, but the thing that you don't hear is that in Singapore, in Pittsburgh, in California, right, so I have Google self-driving cars going by my house all the time, right? They all have safety drivers. And so whenever you hear about how many accidents, for example, a Google car, so Google cars have been involved in something like 18 accidents, right? And most of them, they have not been at fault. The car gets hit from behind. But I've been in the Google cars, and they have a safety driver, and the safety driver takes over fairly often. And most of the time, it's the safety driver being cautious. But some of the time, the safety driver prevents an accident. And that's really the number that never gets published, is how often does the safety driver take over where there would have been a serious accident, okay? So, but in any case, we're seeing more and more of this. And yet, so again, what we see in the news is Singapore testing self-driving cars. No, they all have a safety driver. There's a trained person behind it. And there's one other kind of secret in the self-driving cars department, which is all the companies are thinking about a control room. And the control room has a human sitting there who can take over the car, either really take it over or just give it a new set of goals. I can talk more about this if people are interested, but we've been working fairly closely with Google and Nissan self-driving cars at NASA, and so there's still that sort of interaction of the human and the self-driving cars. So also in the last few years, Big Blue, right? So beating the best human at chess. Watson, right? PokerBot. The Google DeepMind division this year beat a human at Go. Go is a board game, right? And from an artificial intelligence perspective, these are big developments. They really are, right? So beating a human at Go was a big deal. On the other hand, if you really think about it, Go is a board game with one rule, right? It's complex in its own way, but we tend to look at these as indicators that AI is moving quickly. It's not moving as quickly. Other areas, robotics and so forth, are moving much quicker. The first AI investment system in Wall Street. But again, if you talk, to the researchers who are doing that work, it only is doing micro trading. Nobody's, at the moment, it's not being trusted to do anything more strategic, anything higher level. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of specific things and this is sort of the heart of what I'm talking about here. In 2011, there was a short paper called The Autonomy Paradox, written by Jack Blackhurst and Morley Stone and Sharon Gresham. And basically what they said was that in some lessons learned from the Department of Defense in the United States, and the Department of Defense in the United States, has a huge budget, right? And so what they're saying is, okay, from that huge Department of Defense budget, the investments in autonomy have generally resulted in increased costs. And what they went on to say is that the reason that the cost increased weren't that the autonomy didn't do what they said it was going to do, the companies that developed the autonomy. So the autonomy did what was promised. The problem was that what the technology and the technology developers didn't do was understand how it would change human roles and how it would interact with humans. And so, in general, the autonomy gets introduced, and you actually have to put more humans in the situation than were there before, so your costs go up. Okay? So this is in 2011. They look broadly. And then you have a situation right now, and in particular, I want to just go through this example. The US every now and then commissions a big new system, right? So there used to be, for a while, there was the Joint Strike Fighter, which was an airplane that was developed over, and they take about a decade. You have probably, I don't know, billions, trillions of dollars go into each one of these things. So about 10 years ago, the Navy put to the US Congress, so the US Navy asked the Congress to approve this thing called the Littoral Combat Ship. And the idea behind the Littoral Combat Ship is very much reduced number of humans. So you have a destroyer-class ship with 45 sailors. That was the goal. And the idea was to do it so that it was an intelligent ship, right? A lot of autonomy built into it. What ended up happening? So this thing was developed. The autonomy, it is a very autonomous ship, but a couple of things happened. So one is, it turns out it's not, they couldn't, 45 sailors couldn't actually sail it. It's 60. Now, if you work in our field, human-computer interaction, being off by 25%, 30% is not bad, right? Normally you're off by an order of magnitude. So 60 was not such a big deal. But here's the really big problem, and this is exactly what happens. Most ships, so I don't know much about the Navy, but in the Navy, things are falling apart. Sailors are categorized from E1. E1 is the most basic sailor, so new, low skill, low ability, up to E10, and then an admiral is an E10, okay, and it's a pyramid, right? So you have a lot of E1s, some E2s, some E3s. And in the US Navy, normally a ship has about 2 or 3 E5s. E5 might even, I don't really know it relative to rank, but it might be like the captains or E5s, okay? This ship, this is no exaggeration, this is actually data presented by the Naval Postgraduate School. The 60 people that had to be on the ship had to all be E5s or above, okay? So they developed a ship that took the number of crew members on it from, say, 400 to 45, or 60 in this case. But it required people with so much training, so many skills. There weren't enough E5s to go around. They had to pull E5s from other ships just to put them on these ships. Now, the first time I heard this story was, I think, maybe December 2014. And then we had the guy from the Naval Postgraduate School come and give more details on it at NASA about mid-2015. And then this week, last week, so here you see September 16th, September 5th. So US Navy orders engineering stand-down retraining for littoral combat ship crews. Updated littoral combat ship USS Montgomery suffers engineering casualty, 5th LCS littoral combat ship. Casualty within a year. So this is right before, as I was preparing this talk, I started seeing that the littoral combat ship is a significant disaster. And what you see here, this retraining of crews, it's because the ship is smart, but none of the work was done that's necessary to make a smart ship interact with the humans. And that's really the core of this talk. And have some more detail on this if people are interested, but this is exactly, I think, where this is the path that if we continue to go down this path is, it's as we develop technologies that are effectively advances in machine intelligence, we can go in one way or another. And the one way is focus on the technology, the other way is focus on how that technology is going to live in the world with the humans it's going to share with. And if you don't do the one, you can develop all the intelligence you want, and you're basically going to have to put more humans on the problem, even if you think you're going to get rid of all the humans in the system, which you generally don't. Okay. This also from a couple of weeks ago. I wanted to put this up here because right at the beginning I wanted to say who's doing this right? What is the right kind of thing to do? And I saw an example this morning at the presentation that we were at earlier of how you teach robots to do certain things that are human skills that are difficult to teach, and really very physically demonstrating the thing for the robot. I thought that was great. 2 weeks ago, this is in Cupertino in California, Steve Jobs always used to do in September the big announcement of new products. So this just happened a couple of weeks ago. It's no longer Steve Jobs, obviously. And so one thing that was very interesting was so they released a new iWatch, which is waterproof. It has a new app, which is designed to measure calorie burn while you swim. And it turns out that determining calorie burn while you swim is not that easy, right? So it wasn't like the science was there to do it. So what Apple did was they built this machine, which measures oxygen in, oxygen out. Had a whole bunch of other sensors looking at this. It took 700 swimmers, all to develop a feature on an app. And now what's particularly interesting too is that the one thing that they realized very early on was that what they were trying to get at, calorie burn, is it's a feature that varies from individual to individual. Different individuals burn at different rates. So the app feature that they developed learns, and it learns from the human. But before they could get it to learn properly, they had to do all of this, okay? So in a way, this is, from my point of view, Apple, the thing that Steve Jobs did right was to focus the products, and this is on the consumer side, right? Consumer applications, to focus the product entirely on the end human user, okay? And in a lot of other industries, we're not doing that. We don't focus it on the end human user. We're just developing technologies, and you build technologies that are not designed to work from the beginning effectively with humans, right? And what I like about this, when I saw this, in a way you look at this, when I saw this presentation, your jaw drops, right? You're like, really, 700 swimmers? They designed this equipment? I mean, how much does that cost? All for one feature and one app. But that is really what we're talking about when you're saying you got humans who are a very complex system, very, very complex system. And then you're trying to develop machines that interact, intelligent systems that interact well with your humans. This is what it takes. And by the way, there's a depressing part about this, which is this article that I took this from is called "Why Apple is the New NASA." And the whole point was that NASA used to do this kind of stuff in the 60s when we used to do this level of research, and we don't really anymore. And to the extent that any of this stuff is left, I mean, I'm happy to say that my division, this is we do this kind of work, but nothing on the scale of this, right? It's really remarkable. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, until I run out of time, is just dive into the details of the story a little bit, okay? Let me start with a bit of a NASA story, because you might say, okay, well, because that's Apple, that's combat ships, how does NASA fit into this, right? So in 2002, I was fairly new at NASA. At Ames had been tasked with developing, so NASA has 10 centers, right? So I'm at one of the NASA 10 centers. I'm at NASA Ames Research Center, right? And there are only 3 research centers. Some of the other centers, Johnson Space Center is, it's Johnson Space Center. It's an operations center. Kennedy Space Center, right? Marshall Space Flight Center. Those are the ones. So Marshall makes rockets. Kennedy is all about the astronauts. Johnson is all about the astronaut. Kennedy is all about launch, right? So NASA is a research, Ames is a research center where I am. But we were doing, for Jet Propulsion Lab in 2002, we were asked to work on the mission planning systems for the Mars exploration rovers. So those were the two rovers that were launched in 2003, one of which is still going, right? So, almost, 13 years later, right? And what happened there was that a tool had been developed to do optimized planning. And so there was at Ames, at NASA Ames, we have an AI division, the Intelligent Systems Division. And the division chief over there used to always say, oh, we develop intelligent systems. And I'd say, yeah, we develop usable systems and you guys don't, right? And part of the goal, and really over the last few years, we've brought those two divisions together to kind of get intelligent, usable systems. That's really what you're trying to get at. But what happened in 2002 was there was a planning interface, which was terrible, the JPL planning interface. And so the NASA team built a tool in the background that would just optimize the plan and give you, so you would say, you would input all the activities that the rover was going to do that day. 1,000 activities. Typical day, the rover did between 700 and 1,000 activities, where each thing that it does, each activity is a picture, or driving a little, or turning the mast. All those things are activities. So every day, you send up a new set of activities to the rover, 600, 700, 800 activities, all with interconstraints, right? So take this picture, and then this one in this order, and then this one, and if you can't take this one, don't take any of them. So those are all constraints. Usually there were more constraints than actual activities, right? 1,000 constraints for 700 activity. It was a hard problem, and basically, this mission, the Mars Exploration Rover's mission, was the first mission where NASA decided to actually do the planning on a daily basis. The way NASA usually does it, and the way NASA did it for all other missions, is you plan a mission down to the minute a year in advance. So, now things would change, and then you've got to replan very quickly, and that's very hard. In fact, right, so the real challenge is not so much planning, but dynamic replanning when things have changed. But this Mars Exploration Rovers was the first time that NASA decided to do a planetary mission where you've landed something and you've not planned out every second. So every day, science would come back from Mars, so you get all these images and sensor readings, and you would replan. And so to come up with the actual plan that you were going to send to the rovers the next day, you had in the order of 2 hours. So you had all these groups of scientists, 200 scientists. They would all work. There was the atmospheric scientists, there was the soil geologist, there was the rock scientist. They had a number of different groups. And then each group wanted to do this and that, and then how would you all put that all together into a plan that finally went up to the rover, and you wanted to make sure that the rover was safe, that the rover wasn't going to roll over, that that you weren't going to turn the mast in a way that it hit something. All these things were part of the engineering challenge. So the system that was developed by NASA Ames, the first one, like I said, just had an optimizing, like artificial intelligence optimizing engine behind the interface that JPL had already developed. And so you would put in all your activities and all your constraints, and then you would press one button that said plan all, and it would give you a plan. The problem was that in the end, you still had multiple humans who had to check that that plan was okay, in part because you have the engineering teams, the science teams. Is it going to accomplish your science goals? Is it going to put the rover in harm's way? And right away, the JPL engineers started calling the system that Ames developed the blender, right? And they called it the blender because you would put in all your activities and it put them everywhere. It gave you an optimal plan, but it was impossible to check it, right? So the first thing that we were asked to do, I was back then, there were just 3 of us in this human-computer interaction team. Now it's big. But there were just 3 of us, and we were asked, and they said, we would like you to develop the feature and the interface so that you can pin activities. So I said, can you do that? I said, yeah, we can do that. And so, basically you would select an activity, had a little drop down, and you would say pin. And So they said, okay, can you go down to JPL and talk to them and tell them that now they can pin activity? So we went down, right? They were trying to, this is the development team. They wanted a set of people from, a human-computer interaction group to go convince them that this thing was getting better, right? And so, talked to them and, they said, okay, they were happy that now you could pin activity. So some things were, now, and there was a tension between, for example, pinning activities impacts the ability of the AI planning system to optimize the plan. So new algorithms had to be developed, right? So that you were still optimizing around the things that had been pinned. But then there were these very interesting moments. So for example, at one point, and I asked this only to the Ames people because otherwise you're making your own people look bad. But I said, if I pin something, can I move it? And I was asking about what functionality do they want, right? If I pinned an activity, can I move it? They said, no, of course you can't move it. You just pinned it. So well, I didn't pin it so I can't move it. I pinned it so the stupid system doesn't move it, right? I'm God to the system. And so you get these interesting just, different views of the world relative to what you're building, right? So in any case, so for this mission, it was a transition. And that system for planning was the one that was used for this mission. And then the human-computer interaction team was asked to develop a separate tool just for the constraints. That was this little constraint editor tool. It was primitive and ugly, and we developed it in HTML back in 2002, and that was hard. There wasn't, HTML was not what it is now back then, right? So things moved around in a clunky way, but it was, we really kind of worked to, understand what the human processes were. And what's interesting is that before this, before this, the AI planning system that we were working around had been used in the late 90s for a mission called Deep Space One. And there, the whole idea was that the software would take over the system completely and do all the activities autonomously, right? And that was a bit of a disaster too, right? It was supposed to be, I think, a 3-week experiment, and it lasted about a day and a half, and it almost killed the spacecraft. But it's still viewed as the first spacecraft that was sort of controlled by artificial intelligence for a period of time, right? So that's before this. And as we go from 2004, 2008, I'll say a little bit about these, to present, what we've done is gone from a system in like the late 90s that kind of really was just like the littoral combat ship example that I gave you before. Had a lot of machine intelligence. The current systems have as much machine intelligence, more obviously, because that has advanced. But what we've really done is spent more than a decade working on how you integrate it with humans so that humans actually can use it without making it hard in that way that we learned back here. What we learned during this mission was how AI systems make it hard for human users who are interacting with it. And the reason it's hard, again, is because you design the system as though it's going to do everything by itself, and in the end it doesn't, because you didn't go and understand the processes around it. So for example, if the original people working on the AI system had understood that somebody was going to have to check that plan every day to make sure that things were in the right place and you had all the right constraints, then they probably would have developed the system differently to interact with humans. That didn't get done, so then you have this impact that the system requires more humans, right? That effect. Anyway, so as we've gone through the past 13 years, then there was the Phoenix Mars lander, which was a polar lander in 2008. Then Mars Science Laboratory, right, which is the big rover that's on Mars now, right? This is the one that's about the size of a Mini Cooper, right? Planning systems for that. Around 2010, we started doing planning systems for space station. And when we were first asked to do that, we thought it might be too different. The time scale is so different. On space station, you're planning out weeks, months, and you're planning in general human activity. But that worked. And so right now, if I go forward one slide, actually let me hit them in, I'll actually give them to you in two orders. So for International Space Station, the planning tools that we developed at Ames are now 3 parts of mission. This is the mission control room for the International Space Station, and this is in Houston. Apex is attitude planning. Plato is power. We didn't make up these names. And then SCORE, for whatever reason, is crew planning. Okay, and all these systems now are integrated systems with an intelligence system behind it that all basically were designed to support with an understanding of what the processes are that the humans are doing. So the evolution from those Mars rovers in 2002 to this, and these have been a huge advance. I mean, literally, like the team on the ground doing planning here, each one of these had a team of about 11 people. And we brought it down from 11 to 2. That's our metric, is can you reduce the number of people that are doing the job, as opposed to increase it, right? So in some ways, what happens is you think you're going to reduce it, and you actually end up increasing it, right? And so our goal is actually to reduce. And so these systems, and in particular SCORE, which is the crew activity planning, it's not just for NASA, right? It's ESA, JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency, and all payloads. Payloads is everything that gets sent up to the space station. All of it is controlled with the tools that we've developed that came out of those Mars exploration rovers missions, simply because we focused on that interaction, really, of developing the intelligence systems relative to the humans. And right now, we're actually training Peggy Whitson, and this is probably everybody knows Scott Kelly, right? Because I've seen that Scott Kelly had also played with Angry Birds, right, on the station. So last year, we sent, for the first time, our software went up to space station. Scott Kelly did the checkout, but the real study starts in November, and it's going to be about 6 months of crew self-scheduling. This has never been done. Always, everything gets scheduled from the ground, right? So, but if you're going to do a deep space mission, if you're going to try and go to Mars or to a near-Earth asteroid or back to the moon, it's not such a big deal. But if you're trying to go anywhere beyond, where you start getting a communication lag of minutes, the spacecraft has to be fundamentally different in terms of its communication to Earth, right? So right now with space station, everything gets done on Earth. All the problem solving, all the decision making is done on Earth, right? And so this is going to be the first test in space of astronauts scheduling their own time. And the reason this is interesting is, you think self-scheduling or scheduling your time is not a big deal. For us, it wouldn't be a big deal. I wouldn't use one of these systems for my daily life because my daily life is not that complicated. The problem is if you're working on a spaceship, which is a giant machine, things that, let's say that you're trying to, I need these resources, I need those resources, there's conflict or something's broken, all those things have repercussions for weeks and months in terms of the overall schedule. So optimizing those decisions matters, and this is it's just the nature of life in space. So let me go back to, maybe I can't go back a slide. The other thread of this, and this is just interesting as a build-up, there's an underwater lab off of Key Largo, Florida. It's a lab about the size of a school bus. It sits about 75 meters underwater. You sort of see it here in the background behind these guys. They call them aquanauts, and usually about half of them are astronauts. Half of them aren't, and it's NASA, ESA, JAXA, so you get a mixed crew. Every summer, there's what's called NEMO, NASA Extreme Environments Mission Operations. They go down for a week to 2 weeks and pretend that they're living in space, right? And so here you see, there are multiple cameras in the facility, right? And this is the porthole. This is where they sit to eat. And it's very funny because I was there for NEMO 19, which was 2 years ago, and there's a camera over here too, and so they're often sitting here. So I was looking at the video screens. I was trying to capture how often they were using the planning systems and how. For example, here what I thought was interesting was, you can't tell, but this is an iPad with the planning system on it. Just like this is our one of the iPads with the planning system on it. This is the first time. This is just two weeks ago, where they used it when actually underwater, which was very cool. They couldn't, I don't know why they did it, because they couldn't really interact with it. But anyway, so we thought that was a good picture. But here you see like them kind of sharing it, which was an interesting development too. We hadn't kind of really designed for that. But one thing that was very funny is that there was a camera here, so I would spend a lot of time watching this and watching what they're doing and counting. And every now and then, and not that infrequently, a big fish would go by this window, right? and because you start actually thinking they're in space, and of course they're not. They're underwater. And this is the mission control room, which of course you see everybody's in shorts and t-shirts because it's in Florida. But so this is a nice test environment, and so the tools that we developed there have been used for the last 5-6 years as the main mission control tool. And again, our entire focus here is we're not just doing this in a sense to develop these planning and scheduling systems for NASA. It is about understanding how you develop increasingly intelligent tools that work well and address some of the different challenges of the different missions, right? So the different challenges, in some cases it's, how do you, the first systems that we developed were used by the mission engineers, right? So it was the mission engineers at JPL who put the plan together. The second mission we worked on, they said right away to us, we want the scientists to be able to do the planning. In other words, before that, the science teams would just kind of say, we want to do this and that, and then just kind of hand that up to the engineers. And it took the engineers time to put that all together. They said, what if the scientists, one level down, could start making the plan? So we said, okay, how do you do that so it's kind of collaborative? So you have to develop these different collaborative kind of environments for the plan to be integrated. Then they actually, from Mars exploration rovers to Mars Science Laboratory, the big decision was, don't co-locate everybody. For Mars exploration rovers, everybody was co-located at JPL for months. And we were all working on Mars time, which was crazy too. Right, so Mars time, you get like an extra 40 minutes a day. And so JPL had arranged, we all had apartments that had blacked out windows. Everything was blacked out so that you could, and all the apartments were cleaned and the food was available on Mars time. They had, so every day it shifted by 40 minutes, which is, it was very, very strange. Because even if you do shift work, people who work from midnight to 8 in the morning, that's okay because it's stable. Once you're on that shift work schedule, but if you're shifting 40 minutes every day, it's very, different. You're in a weird environment, and people would say, "Why are you here having why are you here having breakfast at 3 in the morning at this diner?" Like people would ask you, the waitress would ask you that, and you say, "Well, we're working on a Mars mission." They say, "Yeah, I'm sure." That happened. So we all had a Mars time watch, and they'd made these watches. So one day I was in Pasadena, that area, and I was in a store, and the person at the store asked me, "Why are you wearing 2 watches?" And I said, "Well, we're working on a Mars mission, and this is my Mars time watch." And it was the same thing. She was like, "Security to the front desk, please." Nobody, but we were working on a Mars mission. Okay, so let me pop back a second here and just hit on a couple of things. Big data, right? Which, if you look at, there's something called Gartner's hype cycle. Are you familiar with this, right? So, okay, big data is actually now on the downswing, right? Self-driving cars and autonomy are right at the top. Big data is already a little not cool. But still, big data is partly what's driving the very fast evolution right now of some forms of what we're considering intelligent systems. So, for example, deep learning is really big data plus neural networks. And you get things like this, right? So this is it. I don't know if you remember, this was just a few years ago, like I think 2013, 2014, that the Google deep learning algorithm was applied to static pictures from YouTube. So they took YouTube, turned it from video into pictures, and then did a huge analysis. And what they had were these, I'm sure they had a lot of stuff come out that was not interesting, but 3 interesting things: a face, right? I mean, a lot of what's on YouTube is faces. This thing, which they decided was a sort of a human, and a cat, right? Because there are a lot of cats on YouTube. And this is interesting, right? This is, wow, you go like, look, you just put a machine and you don't tell it anything, and you put it on all this data, and suddenly you have a face detector, right? Well, is it really a face detector, or is it just pattern, data aggregation? And the question is really, what do you get from this a level up? And this has continued, right? So if you look at it right now, and this happens on Google, right? If you look at a picture on Google, so you want images of, say, dogs, right? And then I click on this one, and then it says, do you want to see other, related ones? And then it shows you ones that are quite similar, right? And you're seeing that more and more on search engines, and same thing like recognition of numbers and all these things. So for this sort of pattern analysis, it's really working very quickly. And it's in part what's behind what's happening with the self-driving cars, for example. It's a lot of this bottom-up pattern analysis. Huge power, right? So Google had to set up a whole separate data center for the self-driving cars because they're collecting so much data about the self-driving cars and then putting it through their neural networks and then playing it back over and over and over again. Part of the power that Google is applying to improving the self-driving cars is whenever something goes wrong and the safety driver takes over, they will correct the algorithms and play it back. And because they're collecting such a rich data set about the world, they can play it back almost exactly like it was, right? And so it'll learn. But here's the thing. That's all bottom up, right? If you take big data plus neural networks plus Moore's law, okay, and that's really what we're seeing today. Is that's what's giving us the progress. That's why you're seeing this pattern analysis that just really seems you say, wow, these machines really are learning, but it's still learning. Much of the learning is really about visual, auditory. So it'll work for things like speech recognition. Any sort of pattern analysis we're seeing an enrichment of. And the nice thing about pattern kind of analysis of that type is that as it starts getting good, it starts seeming more human. It starts seeming more intelligent. But the fact is that humans have this whole other side, right? The top down. Right? And I could, this could be like this could be a whole semester course. So I'm compressing all this, right? But humans, we're very causal, right? And this is it's well understood from developmental psychology, right? That children learn by observing the consequences of things, right? I don't know if you're familiar with this cartoon. I really like it, right? It says this guy pulls this thing and he gets hit by a lightning bolt and he's all smoky. And it says normal person says, I guess I shouldn't do that. And then scientist, I wonder if that happens every time. Right? But it's it's built into humans that we're like that this causes that as a big part of it. Machines obviously correlational reasoners, and it's not that people in the kind of machine learning, machine intelligence area aren't aware of this. It's just that this hasn't made progress. In the early 90s, when I was at Carnegie Mellon, I was part of probably the biggest AI project at the time, and it was entirely focused on that problem, which is how you go from that low-level kind of pattern analysis that we're getting now, still, 2016, to knowledge, to chunks of the type that we humans apply that generalize. And very little progress has been made in that, in part because we don't understand it. And we don't understand really how it works with humans, right? Now, the flip side is humans are, we're not good at fast things. If for movies, you would, you always see, a movie, if a plane's going to crash, the person saves it at the last second. That actually doesn't happen. If a human has just a few seconds to save something where they're complex things and you got to solve a problem, we generally don't solve it. But humans are incredibly good in the hours to days to weeks, right? That's where we build all of this, and so that kind of problem solving. And then, interestingly, again, for humans, remarkably little exposure to data is needed, right? So if you think about, the first 2 years of learning, if you think about the fact that at 6 to 7, 8 years old, children are learning in the order of 150 words a day, right? Usually with 1 to 2 exposures, right? Hot, ooh, hot, right? Bicycle, love, and children, they learn that very, very quickly, right? And machines, what we're seeing now is machines, you go, oh, look, it learned to recognize a face. Yeah, it looked at 1 billion pictures, right? Babies, from the minute they're born, they look around the room and they focus on faces right away, right? Now, that's in part because the brain has already, that's built in. But the part that's built in by evolution, the part that allows us to recognize faces at birth, that allows us to start seeing the association, those, again, that's the bottom up, right? The top down is part of the architecture that's not well understood. Let me skip a few things here. Not interesting. Okay. So here's what, like if you look at the world kind of now, right? So this is the Tesla factory that's just across the bay from us in California, right? Really impressive set of robots. But if a person goes into one of these cages, they'll get hurt, right? And in fact, it happened at Honda, I think a year ago or so, maybe a year and a half, right? That somebody was killed. They went in and they got crushed. And was that the robot's fault? No. I mean, and I'm not just saying this in a simplistic sense. The robot it only does, it has no sensors to detect humans. It has no, it just wasn't programmed to do any of that, and none of the technology in there. So it's kind of, I think of those as caged robots, right? They are dangerous to humans because, not because they're interested in attacking humans, they're just not made to interact with them. Then we have robots in the wild, and maybe these aren't, wild might be the wrong word, it might be domesticated robots. So this is the Roomba, right? This is at the hospital that's very close to my house. These little things go around and they take medicine and towels, and if they come up behind you, they stop. They're a little awkward, but they move around, and they're meant to interact in a world with humans. And I put this up only as a metaphor, as an example, because when you think of software, and that whole story that I told you before about the mission planning software, what we went from when we started that work in 2002, that first effort that we inherited was really, I would say, caged artificial intelligence. It was artificial intelligence developed with no sensibility to the humans around it. So it was exactly like this. And we're trying to move intelligent systems from this to a world where they're meant from the beginning to interact with humans. And I think it's an easy concept for us to think about with robots. It's less easy with computers, with software, right, with intelligent systems. But it's the same thing. This is an example. This is a Robonaut, right? So this is at the lab. This thing is actually up on space station now. And it's a robot specifically designed to work in very tight environments with humans in it. If it bumps into a human, it retracts its arm a little. If you push it, it really, it's very funny to actually do that. It's very strong, obviously, but it's very sensitive. So because it's meant to interact in a world where you're not, you really don't want to hurt the human, right? And that's what he's demonstrating. He's pushing it around. He's moving it, right? So capable to some extent, but meant to. So this is, and again, I'm using these as examples of what we then talk about when we think about artificial intelligence of the non-robotic type. So here's another example. A few years ago, we had a company, Rio Tinto. Rio Tinto was one of the big mining companies from Australia. And they came to talk to us and they said, we need your help. We've got whole mines where, we've got half the mine is like it used to be, all humans doing the things. And then the other half of the mine is completely autonomous. The trucks are driving themselves. The drills are doing everything, and so I remember thinking, well, why are you talking to us? You're done, right? I assume your goal is to get rid of humans, to reduce costs. And they said, no, the problem is that you still need humans for a few things, right? So for example, when you're drilling in certain places, do you drill this way or that way? And they still have to bring in, say, an expert geologist, right? And because those are the things that we're still not good at, is in terms of computers, right? Like with the vision systems and everything, which way and so you get a geologist who goes in and looks and he says, yeah, the vein is going this way and you want to drill that way, right? Well, the problem is they couldn't bring humans in because the humans were likely to get killed, right? Because the whole place was dangerous for humans because none of the automation was meant to have humans in it. Same thing with everywhere, right? You're seeing. Now, here's one other, I like this story too, right? So Toyota about 2.5 years ago had a story where they said that in some of their factories they were replacing robots with humans. And it went on to say, well, it's part of Japanese culture of the sort of, back to the samurai of expertise of, that you make your sword kind of thing, that humans becoming experts is a, but then it actually said no. The reality, the reason that they're replacing the humans is that with the minute you have a robot doing something, the process stops improving. And they were finding that as they were trying to go from, so for example, you have Tesla developing a new factory, and the new factory is, quite modern. Toyota didn't have the knowledge of how to make that jump because the robots don't know how to improve things, right? And it sounds, trivial, but it's not, right? I mean, the learning how to improve a process comes from actually doing it, from human experts doing it over and over, right? And I actually, this year, we went out to the Nissan facility. There's a Nissan facility in Nashville, Tennessee. Interesting place. And there's a whole bunch of things that humans did. And I kept asking the question, why is a human doing that instead of a robot, right? Because there was a lot of robot stuff, right? In the end, I realized that there was really one answer, which was because the humans are, right now the human is cheaper at doing this job than a robot. It was all about money, right? So, and that makes sense, right? It was, you're trying to, so, as soon as it's cheaper to have a robot do this thing, then a human will replace it. But what was interesting was, for the places where somebody said, oh yeah, we're constantly improving the processes. So, they had a system where people recommend how to improve for the parts that humans are still doing. So I asked, does that happen a lot? Is it once a year that you guys that a human figures out? And it goes, no, we're working 30 improvements right now. So even in these highly automated factories, you're seeing more and more of this. Okay, I'll go through. I think I'm already at an hour, right? Okay. I'll start wrapping up. Another thing to think about. Okay, so self-driving cars. These are the little Google cars that are driving around Mountain View and all around that area, Silicon Valley. Again, it is impressive, right, that we have self-driving cars. Yet they all have safety drivers who take over fairly often, and in fact, so right now their real accident rate, if a safety driver wasn't taking over, is about 20 times more often than a human. And what you always see in the news is, in the U.S., 35,000 people die every year in car accidents. And go, oh my God, that's, But if you look at that over the miles driven, it's actually incredibly low, right? So these cars are not approximating that. But the other thing that's deceptive is that driving is a low cognitive demand task. And really, I think that the most interesting thing that's happening right now is how do we get intelligent systems to really help us with more kind of we all think that it's, we're getting to the point where we're getting more support with cognitive level activities. We don't think about it, but driving is boring, generally, right? If you're driving on a highway, that's what's hard about driving, is it's hard to pay attention because it's not very engaging, right? It's not like if you're in a conversation with somebody, or if you're, doing math, or if you're actually doing, any sort of, creative activity, be it, engineering, science, or art. Those are cognitively engaging, right? Driving, not cognitively engaging. And so, for the most part, cars right now, the self-driving cars, are getting up to about one accident every 40,000 miles, which isn't bad. Still nowhere near humans, right? Humans is more like one serious accident every million miles. But that's because the 40,000 miles, one accident every 40,000 miles you're getting because it's largely doesn't involve a lot of higher cognition. But the reason humans have as few accidents as we do, even though we're not good at paying attention consistently, is because of the top-down, because we understand the causal effects, because you can solve problems you haven't seen before. I'm going to skip this. I like that stuff. It's very interesting, but I'm going to skip it for the sake of time. Okay, I want to make another point here. A thing that we forget is, so basically, the brain is, and there are different numbers. You can look it up. It's sometimes people, an adult brain, 20 billion neurons, maybe 80 billion neurons, about 1 trillion connections, all firing about 5 times a second. That's a human brain, right? an ant has about 100,000 neurons. We still don't have anything like this, right? It's not like we have little artificial ants going around. Last year I was giving a talk somewhat similar to this, and there was a neuroscientist in the audience who said, 30 years ago, this is what he said to me, right? When I was doing my PhD, his PhD advisor gave him a job, which was to take a lobster, right? And lobsters are interesting because lobsters have very thick neurons, like about 1 millimeter thick. So they get used for research, and because you can put little electrodes in and measure what's going on. Now, if you cut off the tail and put it in a saline solution, the lobster tail will keep swimming, right? So there are 18 neurons, and this is well understood. There are 18 neurons that control the swimming of a lobster tail. So you cut off the whole top of the lobster, and you can put little electrodes into all those because they're quite thick. And so this researcher was given the job by his supervisor over a summer to work out what the process was by which a lobster tail swims. He made no progress, right? He'd kill this neuron, everything else would adapt. 2, 3, 4, any combination, the whole system would adapt. Incredibly dynamic, self-correcting homeostatic system. And what he said was, 40 years later, those 18 neurons are not understood. So 20 to 80 billion neurons. So part of our problem, I think, is that the complexity of the human brain and how it works and how it operates. And in particular, humans do certain things very well. Like, again, the reasoning, the problem solving, the adaptive decision making. The consequence of that, though, is we have certain biases and things that we tend to get wrong. There's been a lot of research on that too, right? The Kahneman and Tversky. We tend to make certain systematic mistakes. We're not Bayesian reasoners, but that's exactly what computers are good at. And so, in some ways, what we're seeing now in the acceleration of the development of machine intelligence is not the potential really for those systems to replace humans. What we're really seeing is the potential for those systems to not even augment humans, but to be, in a sense, collaborators with humans. To be and in order to do that, what you have to do is go back to that, the example I gave at the beginning from Apple and looking at 700 swimmers, except that we have to do it not for swimming, but for the higher. So what I think is coming in the next, say, 20 years is an understanding of the complex relationship between humans and the activities that we do as we, especially as you get to higher order cognitive activities, doing things like looking at 700 swimmers, but really, again, at a cognitive level, to really understand it and develop intelligent systems that are based and wrapped around what humans do well, what humans don't do well. And that's what we haven't been doing, which is why you get things like the littoral combat ship that I talked about at the beginning, which is an intelligent ship that takes more humans to manage it. And that, at least in my experience at NASA, and certainly in experiences that we see in industry, and it's exactly what you see across aviation too. As airplanes get more intelligent, they cause more trouble for pilots, right? So then you say, oh, so many plane accidents are because of human error. Yeah, they're human error because the system is so difficult now, right, that it makes it more of a challenge, right? So really the focus should be on intelligent systems that are entirely developed around understanding the changing human roles that they're going to affect. And again, my impression is that we're still doing that very little, that we're still working on evolving technologies that are effectively like caged robots. And that's the story. I think slides, I can stop there, and I know that I've gone a little long, and I apologize for that. Thank you.